The reading this week focused on changes in and challenges of the new republic. As you learned last week, in 1787, a new constitution was written to replace the Articles of Confederation, the first governing document of the United States. But that certainly was not the final challenge of the early years for the country. In fact, the debate over the ratification of the Constitution helped expose fissures that continued to shape political debates as political parties emerged. The Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, were in strong favor of a federal government, while the Jeffersonians, who became the Republicans and were led by Thomas Jefferson, were in favor of states' rights. Originally, the Federalists centered their efforts on lobbying for the Constitution. Federalists were focused on the development of commerce and cities and supported the U.S. having a strong relationship with Great Britain. Jeffersonians or Republicans wanted the country to become one of small farmers and supported the U.S. having a strong relationship with France. The growing importance of print journalism helped stir debates. I do note that our current political party, that's called the Republicans, is not a direct descent of the Republicans of the early years of the country. The current Republican Party came into being right before the Civil War. George Washington became the first president of the United States in 1788, and he understood the symbolic importance of his role and took great care with his public image. He tried to stay neutral, at least in public, about political parties, although he was sort of ultimately philosophically aligned with the Federalists and did believe in a strong national government. He decided to step down after 2 terms, setting a precedent that has been followed by all presidents except Franklin Roosevelt, and it's now the law you have to step down after 2 terms. His decision helped the Federalists as he announced it in September, making it difficult for Republicans to mount a successful campaign for one of their candidates. And in his famous farewell address, he denounced political parties, although he was actually aligned to some extent with one. And he also counseled the U.S. to stay out of entanglements with foreign powers. And this has often been used throughout American history as evidence for why the U.S. should be sort of an isolationist power. So John Adams was elected after Washington with the Republican Thomas Jefferson as the vice president, so that didn't work out that well. And then Jefferson was elected 4 years later as president in 1800. A significant accomplishment during his presidency was the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the United States and was made up of land sold for $15 million by France, then under Napoleon. Jefferson was afraid the purchase might be unconstitutional, as the Constitution did not specifically lay out the right to acquire new territory for the country. And he was also concerned that the people brought into the United States by this purchase would not be loyal to the country. He did, however, ultimately back the purchase. So, the Republican who was against the idea of expanding the power of the federal government, in fact, did expand it by backing this purchase. That wasn't explicitly laid out in the Constitution, a way to do it. The political culture continued to be raucous in the years after Jefferson's presidency, particularly during the administration of Andrew Jackson, who was elected in 1828. And you often hear the term Jacksonian democracy sort of aligned with the idea of popular sovereignty and sort of respect for the common man. And in some ways, the country did become more democratic, meaning that more people took an interest in and had a say in how the country would be run, and that in some ways social distinctions became less prominent. Significantly, restrictions such as property requirements to vote, property requirements that kept some white men from voting, had been removed. At the same time, the country was in many ways not democratic, obviously. African Americans, even those who were free, and women, no matter of their race, had few rights. African Americans, even in states where slavery was outlawed, usually lacked the right to vote, serve on juries, or serve in the military, because these rights were associated with full citizenship. They were also often denied access to schools and full membership in churches. Now, that doesn't mean people just accepted the situation. During the Revolution and early Republic, abolitionists began to argue that black people should be free, just as the colonies were freed from Britain, and arguing that African Americans had the same natural rights as other colonists. All men are created equal. Now, women during this time period were subject to the wishes of their husbands and fathers. Married women generally did not have the right to own property or any claim on their children. Now, some, again, like Abigail Adams, argued that women should be granted their natural rights. Others argued that women, even if they weren't going to be given full rights, needed to be well educated to serve their country as mothers. It would be their job to raise sort of virtuous citizens for the Republic. The Native Americans were also subject to prejudice and worse. Presidents before Andrew Jackson had wished to remove Native Americans from the eastern part of the country to west of the Mississippi, but there was particular pressure to accomplish this quickly by 1828 when Jackson is elected, and it was a priority for Jackson. He believed a states' rights took precedent over tribal rights, and he also was very prejudiced against Native Americans, believing they were both sort of childlike and violent. His supporters introduced a bill to Congress in 1830 to implement Indian removal. Some members of the Cherokee tribe held out until 1838, and they were then forced to march to Oklahoma. Over a quarter of people on the march died, which leads to this name, the Trail of Tears. So again, don't be too taken into this idea of Jacksonian democracy, because certainly many people were left out of the idea of popular sovereignty as it was defined by the 1820s, 1830s in the United States. All right, I'll see you next week.